Hey guys, Spirit of the Lie here. In this video, we're going to take a shot at working out the ideal order for getting unit upgrades, focusing in this one on the Knight line. While many units can be looked at in a similar way, and this could potentially become an ongoing series looking at different units, even just limiting our focus to Castle Age with this one unit, you have quite a few options, between bloodlines, 2 separate attack upgrades, 2 armor upgrades, husbandry, and devotion, as well as a small set of unique upgrades we can include for specific civilizations. With that, let's first acknowledge there are 3 overarching situations you might be using knights, which are raiding, fighting ranged units, or fighting melee units, and which one, as a spoiler, dramatically changes the ordering you ideally pick up different techs. Obviously, you can be up against a combination, in which case you need to decide for yourself which you're most concerned about. We'll start with maybe the perfect situation, which is you're raiding with knights, and enemy military units are nowhere to be seen. You've completely caught your opponent with their pants down. In that case, to figure out which upgrades are the most important, we'll have to look at what they all offer. To start with the first attack upgrade, it's actually very significant, as without it, our knights need 5 hits to bring down a villager with loom, whereas with the first attack upgrade, we need just 4 hits. To say our knights become 25% more effective here is maybe even underselling it, as we've all experienced getting a villager down to just 1 hit left just to have them escape into a town center or tower, whereas turning that villager at 4 HP left over into a successful kill denies a lot of future resources for your opponent. On the other hand, the second attack upgrade changes nothing about how quickly you bring down a loomed villager, so that's definitely not as big of a priority. Alternately, as nice as it is to take down villagers, there's also something to be said for just having your knights tank more town center arrows, keeping your opponent's units garrisoned under pressure for longer. So how much extra tankiness do you get from bloodlines versus the armor upgrades? One complicating factor is town centers have anywhere from 5 to 7 attack, depending on if your opponent has fletching and bodkin arrow researched. There's also the issue that getting each armor upgrade may give a different size benefit, depending on whether you have bloodlines researched first or not, meaning there's 18 different possible states that a knight and a town center can interact, where the number of arrows they take looks like this. What we can do to simplify things is average how much each upgrade helps, and it turns out on average, bloodlines lets knights survive 19% more arrows, +1/+1 armor lets them take 36% more, and +2/+2 armor lets them take about 60% more above and beyond that. Albeit there is a bit of variability within this, and armor looks extra good against town centers lacking attack upgrades. For those reasons, when raiding with knights, I would put the order of priority with the armor upgrade first, as it lets you take 25 to nearly 50% more arrows from town centers depending on fletching and bodkin arrow for a very cheap 150 food cost. That's followed by bloodlines, which gives a pretty consistent 20% improvement in survivability, and you can also pick up on the way to Castle Age, followed by +2 armor, which greatly helps survivability, albeit for a relatively high 400 resource cost. I would follow that up with the +1 attack for the easier villager picks, though you could swap that position with +2 armor, then followed by husbandry for the mobility, and then +2 attack, which just really isn't on the radar, at least in this situation. Now this all sets us up nicely to move on to ranged units, particularly crossbows, as they have the same attack as town centers, but actually simplify things a bit because no one making crossbow is going to ignore bodkin arrow. We can just assume crossbows all have 7 attack, cutting down on the number of cases and that hand-wavy averaging we had to do. Maybe not surprisingly, in this case again, +1 armor gives clearly the highest value. To get these value scores I'll be showing, I took the benefit to the knights for each upgrade as a percentage increase, and then divided that by the cost of the tech, multiplying by 10,000 to get a nicer looking number. And technically, it's telling us what percent increase in effectiveness it's giving knights for every 100 resources spent toward the upgrade. But big number good is a sufficient summary for our purposes here. Interestingly, the +2 armor actually comes out looking a little better here than bloodlines, as it's a 36% improvement for 400 resources, which is actually better value than a roughly 20% improvement for 250 resources. You could put +2 armor and bloodlines in either order. I personally like to grab cheaper techs first, so I like bloodlines a bit more. Just note a knight with +2 armor takes more shots than a knight with +1 armor and bloodlines. The attack upgrades then are a little trickier to compare, as they depend on how much armor the crossbows have. If they have +2 armor, then forging gives you a 25% improvement, whereas if the crossbows have just +1 armor, then forging has basically no effect, and they take 4 hits to defeat either way. So it sounds like we need to go back to averaging. Doing that across the various combinations, the first attack upgrade makes knights 8% more effective against crossbows, and the second attack makes them then 11% more. So compared to the effect of the armor upgrades and bloodlines, these are clearly the lower priority, and I would even value them below husbandry. Again, I also like Bloodlines ahead of +2 armor because it's cheaper and you can grab it earlier, but +2 armor technically gives slightly better value. Note that we can't completely generalize this to all ranged units, and for example, against a low attack unit like Elite Skirmishers, armor upgrades are then even more valuable. The first +1 armor means instead of 3 damage, your knights take just 2, so it's a 50% improvement in survivability compared to Bloodline's 20%. The second armor upgrade is then arguably even more important than cutting skirmisher damage from 2 to 1, effectively doubling your survivability. For that reason, against skirmishers, the first 2 armor upgrades are way more valuable than anything else, with the attack upgrades only giving you an 8% and 11% increase in damage being at the back again. The only wrinkle here is you can pick up Bloodlines on the way to Castle Age, and my point isn't to ignore Bloodlines or avoid getting it before +2 armor, but more so to emphasize the importance of +2 armor and how much value it's giving. Knights without armor and knights with +2 are just completely different units against skirmishers. Cavalry Archers then go the other way, having 1 more attack than Crossbows, in which case you get the best value from +1 armor, followed by Bloodlines, which has a similar-ish effect as the second armor, but for a much cheaper cost, so Bloodlines is the second highest priority in this situation. There's even a good argument for Husbandry as the third upgrade here, and that's where I'd put it to at least make sure you can keep up with Cavalry Archers, and potentially chase them down if they don't have Husbandry themselves. So far though, as a general pattern, the armor upgrades have looked amazing against ranged units. Bloodlines has been solid, and the attack upgrades have clearly been a lower priority. But let's see if that changes when we flip things around and look at knights against melee units. One obviously important matchup here is knights against other knights. In that case, again, +1 armor comes out looking to give the best value, with a 15% improvement on average for just 150 resource cost, followed closely by the first attack upgrade, which gives a similar 13% improvement for the same 150 resources. Bloodlines then comes in third, with an 18% improvement for 250 resources. I wouldn't put off Husbandry any further than that, as being able to outrun or force engagements with enemy knights has a lot of intangible value. Rounding things out then is the second attack and then second armor in that order. Bloodlines is 18% and not 20% by the way, as I'm still averaging across all the potential combinations of attack and armor that you and the enemy knights could have, and I've been doing that for all the numbers throughout. I then did all the same calculations again for longswords as another generalist melee unit to see if the results are consistent. In that case, attack and armor flipped in value, as the first attack upgrade just ends up working out better than against knights, and the +1 armor and +2 attack line up to help a tiny bit less, but the list is mostly the same. I then tried the same calculation for Camel Riders, keeping in mind they have 9 unblockable attack against our knights, which just intuitively should mean armor is less helpful, since you're still only bringing down their now higher attack by 1. As expected, +1 attack becomes slightly more valuable in that case, but otherwise the order is pretty similar. I'd also put Husbandry as a bit higher priority here, given camels are faster than knights by default, but a knight with Husbandry is faster than a camel without. I then took this idea further and looked at Pikemen to see if armor objectively becomes less and less valuable with increasing bonus damage, and that intuition did hold up. When all the numbers are crunched, you get the most value out of the first attack upgrade, followed by Bloodlines, the first armor, +2 attack, and then +2 armor last. The general consensus I've heard is to do attack upgrades before armor against Pikemen, but the problem with +2 attack here is it's relatively expensive, and if Pikemen have no armor upgrades, they take the same number of hits from full HP, without or with that tech. Treating melee units then as a group, the main takeaway is the first attack is consistently very valuable, and Bloodlines is also up there as well. Armor is then great when no bonus damage is involved, but becomes more situational against things like camels or pikemen. +2 attack is then consistently better than +2 armor, which is actually a huge reversal from ranged units, where that +2 armor was even showing up ahead of Bloodlines several times. The old adage that you want attack upgrades against melee and armor against ranged units does generally hold up to scrutiny, but I think taking that too literally undervalues +1 armor in melee, which for its price tends to give significantly more value than the second attack. Now with the 3 main cases of raiding, ranged units, and melee units covered, we should quickly mention a handful of civilization exceptions. The first is Burgundian Cavaliers 1 age earlier and that upgrade at half price, which for 150 food and gold gives knights +20 HP and +2 attack. If we look at that as being Bloodlines plus the 2 attack upgrades put together, it's 740 resources of value for 300. I consider this a very high priority, as it makes your knights roughly 50% better in melee. Technically, the armor upgrades can still give better value against skirmishers on a resource spent basis, which maybe just again highlights how valuable that tech is. But Cavalier at half price is a pretty fantastic upgrade for the Burgundian Knightline in Castle Age, especially for what it costs and the fact they don't have bloodlines. The second case to mention is Bulgarians with Stirrups, which for 600 resources gives a 33% attack speed boost. In terms of value, this is actually pretty much in line with the usual attack upgrades, which give on average 8 to 12% of an improvement each, so call it a 20 to 25% improvement for the Knightline compared to a 33% improvement from Stirrups for 600. I see this tech raising the ceiling for late Castle Age Knights, but something to get after +1 armor and attack as well as bloodlines. And finally, Burmese have a unique tech for +4 attack against archers, costing 600 resources. Cost-wise, this is basically forging 4 times in a row, but restricted against archers. Remember, attack upgrades give comparatively less than armor and bloodlines against ranged units generally, so I'd suggest it ahead of +2 attack if I'm up against archers, but that's about it. Also, we should quickly touch on Devotion as the last relevant tech, which increases the conversion time of monks by 1 second on average. I played around with this, and trying 100 monks converting knights starting 4 tiles away, the knights successfully defeated the monks before being converted just 13% of the time, and at any further starting distance is essentially a 0% success rate. Husbandry brings this up to 18%, whereas then Devotion on its own raises this to a 27% success rate. Interestingly, +2 attack ended up being just as helpful, as it lets them take down a monk with Sanctity 1 hit sooner. Given how few moments that tech has had to shine in the video, it's nice to end on a spot we can highlight it. So those are the knight upgrades in the order I think they make the most sense in many common matchups based on their effects and cost. Generally, it seems like a good idea to pick up bloodlines and 1 blacksmith tech early, leaning more toward the second armor against ranged units and at least +1 attack against melee. Whether this all aligns with your usual game plan or not, hopefully it at least gives you a few ideas to think about. Big thanks to James, Woodruff, Jared2142, Samantha, Shawarma Rider, General Anesthesia, Siddhant Shah, and everyone else on Patreon for their generous support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.